Inside this Reply All edition of Bills, we're redrafting. Call Mel Kiper and Chris Trapasso, we're redrafting. We are also considering Myles Garrett again, ranking dual threat quarterbacks, and talking about Dalton Kincaid again. With stupefying gall, I am replying all to the Bills. What ye have spake, come my hot take on the Bills. Reply all numero uno. On a recent episode of Locked On Bills, link in show notes, Joe Marino was joined by Bruce Nolan for what has become an annual tradition for the two stalwarts of the Buffalo Bills body punditry, and they entered into evidence how they would have drafted had Brandon Beane handed them the reins to the team cell phone. I'm not going to spoil their selections by sharing them here, so if you want to know how Joe and Bruce played the board, you'll have to go listen to the episode of Locked On Bills, to which I've provided the link in the show notes. As for my selections, I'll first share my approach, the rules by which I played the game. First, I played the game with total hindsight baked into the cake. I undertook 1,000 mock drafts between February 10th and April 24th. And I'm not even sure I'm exaggerating when I say that. And probably a couple dozen more throughout draft weekend. But my flux capacitor's in the shop, Marty. And so I can only share my ex post facto 2025 NFL draft as a man who watched every second of the 2025 NFL draft. I cannot escape hindsight, and so I won't try. Second, I have limited my selections to those players who were on the board where the Bills were picking. So, for example, I couldn't take Jahdae Barron with pick 30 because Barron went 20th to Denver. The third and final rule is that even though I am not resisting the invasion of hindsight into these picks, I also want to maintain some light attachment to those prospects that I identified and liked prior to the actual draft. Other than that, though, it was up to me. And so, without further ado, and with only brief justifications, with the 30th pick, I took Maxwell Hairston. He was the best athlete available at the most crucial position. While I don't disagree that football games are won in the trenches, they can still be lost on the perimeter. And to compete in a league that has grown increasingly pass-dependent for 30 years, a team needs to match talented cornerbacks against talented receivers. What's more, a lockdown corner can more easily help a defensive lineman get home with good coverage than a blitzing defensive lineman can help a cornerback stay in phase. If you want more depth from me on that topic, I have plenty more to say, but I want to keep these redraft justifications brief, so you'll have to argue with me on Twitter. My handle is @TheBillsPod. Hell of a handle, ain't it? With the 41st pick, and having applied the full power of full hindsight to have the confidence that this player would still be, unfathomably to me, available at this pick to which the Bills have traded up, I'm taking Donovan Ezra, who I think is the best pass rusher in this draft class, and that is including Abdul Carter. In this week's big edition of Bills, you can listen to all the reasons why I am able to sleep okay at night, knowing that Ezraku, my number one 2025 NFL draft crush, was passed over twice by Brandon Beane, But for this reply all edition of Bills, suffice it to say that if the Bills want to solve the third and medium and certainly third and long problem from last year, they ought to have gotten themselves the best pass rusher in the draft class. With the 72nd pick, I'm taking Jordan Farmer, the defensive tackle who I was certain would be a Buffalo Bill because of how neatly he fits the typical Bean McDermott mold. 6'3", 305 pounds at the combine, a playing weight probably closer to 315 to 320, just like Daquan Jones. With long 35-inch arms and big 10.25-inch hands, Farmer seemed a specimen built to play the part of the one tech with possible three tech flexibility that seems to pair so nicely with Ed Oliver. Ultimately, though, the Bills preferred TJ Sanders, who profiles more as a three tech with possible one tech flexibility. Sanders is the better athlete and more developed prospect, but Farmer represents a player who is built to be paired with Ed Oliver, whereas Sanders seems to be a player who could be groomed to be Oliver's successor. Farmer also represents the depth of this defensive tackle class, depth which enables a team like the Bills, who really need a good defensive tackle, to wait until the third round, pick 72 overall, to get their really good defensive tackle. And so also add players like Hairston and Ezeraku without whiffing on adding said defensive tackle. I hope I'm wrong. Of course. But hindsight has me preferring Ezeraku and Farmer a little more than Sanders and Landon Jackson. At pick 109, though I've grown to love Deon Walker and will be rooting for him to prove every last detractor very, very wrong, I'm going to complete my defensive tackle double dip by selecting Jordan Phillips, another defensive tackle that seemed to have Sean McDermott written all over his profile. High school wrestler and a power lifter with an immovable lower half that somehow possesses nimble feet. Phillips is also 20 years old, and so shares that moldable ball of clay characteristic that seemed to attract Bean and McDermott to Greg Rousseau in the 2021 NFL Draft. With the 170th pick, I run to the podium with a little card that reads Pooh Paul, Pooh Paul, Pooh Paul on it, and make one of the best value picks of the draft. For all of the attention the Bills paid Paul at the Combine and through their 30 visit with him, I was pretty flabbergasted, to be candid, that they left him on the board after pick 170. Sitting here in early May with Jordan Hancock as a member of both the secondary and special teams units, I'm very happy. But there's this old adage around the football world that a team should tend to do that which an opponent would most prefer they not do. And I think most other GMs would be kicking themselves if they let the Bills get a blue chip potential Matt Milano replacement with a full year to coach him up with the 170th pick. And so I would have taken Chris Paul Jr. at 170. With the 173rd pick, I could say I'd take Jordan Hancock here, and I continue to think that he was an excellent selection in the actual draft, but it seems to belie the nature of the exercise if I do that. So I'm going to take Bryce Cabledew, the mauling, athletic offensive lineman out of Kansas, who seems to profile as the perfect Alec Anderson replacement should Anderson slot in at left guard in the instance that David Edwards isn't re-signed after this 2025-26 season. I also, in accordance with my third rule of this exercise, which requires me to maintain a certain soft attachment to prospects I liked in a pre-draft context. Just really liked Bryce Cable-Dew's tape. It was so Alec Anderson to me. With the 177th pick, I'm chalk with the Bills for the first time since the first round, as I'm stacking depth and competition at corner by taking Dorian Strong. Most analysts had mid-third, early fourth grades on Dorian Strong, so this is another awesome value pick. McDermott loves competition, and I can only assume he loves it that much more when it's in the secondary. And how could the Bills, of all teams, not want legitimate insurance, good insurance, when needing to hit on a quarterback in the NFL draft? That was cornerback. I said it as though like a quarterback, but obviously cornerback. The Bills know better than anyone else that if you need a cornerback and you took one in the first round, you should probably take a second one later. And with the final pick in this draft, number 240, I'm going with one of my guys, capital M, capital G, my guy, Kyle Monangai, running back out of Rutgers. Monangai was one of my favorite tapes to watch because he is relentlessly violent, regularly punishing any defender, be it a defensive tackle who outweighs him by 100 pounds, or the defensive back brave enough to try and bring him down at the second level. Monangai is also a two-time captain who never, not once, put the ball on the deck during his 5 years in college. Even though there's currently no room for him in the running back rotation, Monangai is the kind of player you want in your locker room. An upstanding citizen who absolutely lays down the law on the field. And since my warm take on James Cook is that he will not sign an extension this offseason, but will instead play out this season on the current deal and then seek big money in 2026, getting a running back like Monangai into the running back room and learning the system for a year before he ever needs to sniff the field seems to just be good, responsible roster building. So, to recap, I'd stick with Hairston at 30, but add Ezeraku with the 41st pick, then double dip at defensive tackle with Farmer at 72 and Don't Call Me Jordan Phillips at 109. With our run of day 3 picks, I would have taken Chris Paul Jr., a.k.a. Pooh Paul, who was still on the board at pick 170. Then I would have selected Bryce Cable-Dew, offensive lineman out of Kansas, with the 173rd pick, and then stayed chalk with Bean in drafting Dorian Strong with the 177th pick before closing out the 2025 NFL draft by adding Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers to the running back room. So, no wide receiver. I love the wide receiver room we've got. From Shakir and Keon right on through Shavers and Chenault. Chenault? Chenault. I think it's actually Chenault. And it's pretty clear, isn't it, that Brandon Bean knew heading into draft weekend that there was a good chance Elijah Moore would wind up signing with Buffalo, isn't it? And so we could have spent all of this year's draft capital on positions of greater need than wide receiver, be that immediate needs like cornerback, the interior of the defensive line, or the pass rush, or needs that are coming down the pipe next year, like linebacker, offensive line, running back. A few more replies all coming your way after this. Sloth Nose Ball posed quite the thought-provoking question on Twitter. So I'm going to spend the bulk of this second Reply All segment on it. At Sloth Nose Ball tweets, and I quote, "The Bills' defensive line improved more this offseason by all the additions they made in the draft and free agency than it would have improved if they had made an aggressive trade to acquire Myles Garrett. I don't know if I believe this yet or not, but it's an interesting discussion," end quote. The reason that this question got discussed on Takes on Takes, the weekly segment Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs do on the NFL Scouting podcast, is not only because the direct object of the proposition, Myles Garrett, is among the greatest football players ever, and therefore the mere mentioning of his name provokes intrigue and interest, but because at Sloth Nose Ball's question requires intellectual interplay between fantasy and reality, between philosophy and mechanics. So, out of the many, many, many ways that this thought-provoking question has and could be answered, here's my response. Think of season 1 of Stranger Things. In the right side up, the normal world where kids ride bikes through suburban streets to school, the team trading for Myles Garrett has to process how the transaction might impact their salary cap this year and into the future. What draft capital is required to make the transaction, how Myles Garrett projects as a locker room fit, etc., and so on. In the Upside Down, though, it's a dark and mystical world where spooky fantasies can play out. In the Upside Down, you make the maneuver in a heartbeat, because in the dark vacuum of the Upside Down, a defensive line of Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Myles Garrett is among the best in football. And in Garrett, you have that one player who could make that one play in that one game when you really need him to. Hindsight from a year or 2 or 3 from now might inform us that Joey Bosa stayed healthy throughout the 2025-26 season. That TJ Sanders and Landon Jackson are monsters. That Michael Hoyt was the glue that stitched together the whole 2025-26 defense, and that Larry Ogunjobi was a difference maker on the interior. But hindsight has no place in the vast emptiness of the Upside Down. And in that vast emptiness, again, you take the 29-year-old all-time great in Myles Garrett over a formerly productive but now often injured Bosa, the serviceable interior lineman in Ogunjobi, and the prospects Sanders, Jackson, and Hoyt 100 times out of 100.
Hold up, wait a minute.
In the right side up, though, even assuming you can make the financial mechanics work and make them work decently well vis-a-vis your overall roster construction, I'll submit my wild card as to why, as the question asks, adding Myles Garrett instead of all the free agents and all the draft picks the Bills have added this offseason does not make the defensive line better. And my wild card is Maxwell Hairston. Yes, Maxwell Hairston, the cornerback, makes the defensive line better. As talented and athletic as Landon Jackson and TJ Sanders are, the leap of faith one has to take to believe in their heart of hearts that either one of them is destined to be a roster-changing, week-in, week-out, play-by-play game changer is larger than the leap of faith one has to take to believe such things of Maxwell Hairston. Hairston's athleticism and production exceed Jackson's and Sanders by a lot. And that's why he was the Bills' first-round pick. And as I mentioned in the first segment of this edition of Bills, I think that a lockdown corner and certainly two lockdown corners, Hairston and Benford, can help a defensive line get home more easily than a good pass rush can help non-lockdown corners. It's a matter of half seconds. And defensive backs closing down quick throwing windows by more of them, half seconds, throughout the course of a game than pass rushers do. So I'm not trading Hairston for Garrett. Call me crazy, but just do it on Twitter, where my handle is @TheBillsPod. Kind of amazing that I snagged that handle in the year 2025, isn't it? Call me crazy, and I'll call you crazy right back for getting upset at me over a thought exercise. But before you call me crazy, I'll offer you this brief story from my life as further justification for why I'd prefer Maxwell Hairston to Myles Garrett, a story which I'll weave into a third and final adjudication on the topic presented by @SlothNoseBall. I was in my dad's basement, on his exercise bike, watching ESPN's NFL coverage on a Saturday or Sunday morning sometime during the height of COVID, prior to Trey White's first injury, the Thanksgiving Day ACL tear. Playing in my head was a vivid and thrilling 2020 playoff run that involved Trey White picking off Patrick Mahomes to seal an AFC Championship win for the Bills. That memory lives rent-free in my head, obviously, because I wouldn't charge the memory of my own imagination rent, though maybe the WeWork guy might offer me different advice. Trey White still holds a lot of space in the connective tissue of my Bills fandom. So much space, in fact, that I get emotional in a very lovely way about the idea of Trey White lifting a Lombardi trophy. In a recent episode of Shout, Matt Marino mentioned the droves that turned out for Micah Hyde's annual softball game. Micah Hyde's retired. It's a freaking softball game. Josh Allen wasn't even there. Why were Bills fans there? Because our love for the team and our love for the Buffalo Bills players supersede any requirement that the team hoist any trophies for our sake. I want to see Trey White lift the Lombardi, and I'm being genuine here, because I want it for him more than I want it for me. Back to the Stranger Things analogy. In the upside down, you take Garrett. In the right side up, you don't sacrifice Hairston. And when you step back and realize that you're watching a television program, then you consider all the elements of a television program that you personally most enjoy. I need charm if I'm going to binge something. I need clean, non-cheesy writing, well-executed acting, and reams and heaps of charm. That je ne sais quoi that makes a show or movie charming. I need the interplay of fantasy and reality to hit just right. I'm jerky. I'm a musician who only likes two bands. I'm an artist who doesn't really love art. I'm a sports fanatic who really only cares about the Bills, and I care about them deeply. And to me, the charm of the Buffalo Bills resides not in the number of trophies the Bills hoist, but in the really cool players they give me to root for. I want to see Trey White lift the Lombardi because it would make me really happy for Trey White. And I'd have more fun watching Maxwell Hairston succeed because he's our guy. Capital O, capital G, our guy. More than I'd like to see the Bills win a Super Bowl because Myles Garrett ran roughshod during a postseason run. It would be intellectually dishonest of me if I said I wouldn't be over the moon about a Myles Garrett acquisition. It would be awesome. But he's not my guy. He's Cleveland's guy. My name is Nick from New York. I'm a self-licensed football therapist who was born and raised in New York City and has been a die-hard Bills fan since he was 5. That's since 1991. January 1991. January 27th, 1991. Yes, that January 27th, 1991. My friends are Yankee fans. I'm very sensitive to Yankee fandom. I don't like Yankee fandom. I don't give a shit how many hamburgers McDonald's has sold, and I don't give a shit how many times the Wall Street Yankees have won the baseball championship. I want a good story. I want the charm of not having Myles Garrett and still going undefeated and winning the Super Bowl. Or not. I root for the Bills to win, of course, but my love for them doesn't change if they don't. I was with them every step of the way through the drought. And I really love our draft picks, and I want to root for them a little bit more than I want to root for Myles Garrett. And so, there you have it at Sloth Noseball. As for a couple more really quick replies all, at Thigh Doctor shared a picture of Dalton Kincaid looking skinny. My reply, who cares? Just run the seam route and go catch a deep pass or two each game, just like you did in college. Better than just about any other college tight end, and I'm happy, Dalton. Isaiah Stanback shared an image of his top 5 dual threats at quarterback, who were Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton, Randall Cunningham, Michael Vick, and Donovan McNabb. Replace Michael Vick with Steve Young, and my guy, my Syracuse Orange, one of my favorite athletes ever, Donovan McNabb, with Josh Allen, and you have my list. Until the next edition of Bills, you Bills Mafia member, remember, if you see me on the street wearing a Bills hat, because I'm always wearing a Bills hat, raise a fist in the air and say, "Go Bills." And I will return the kind greeting by raising a fist of mine very own in the air and saying, "Go Bills, go Bills, go Bills, Bills."